What if a simple meal could change the way you see kindness forever? Imagine walking into a busy restaurant, the air rich with the aroma of sizzling steaks and fresh bread, the soft hum of conversations filling the space. It's one of those nights where people come in with different stories, some celebrating, some lost in thought, and some simply looking for a quiet place to escape the weight of their day. Among the crowd is Emily, a waitress who has been on her feet for hours, yet her energy never fades. With a warm smile and a notepad in hand, she moves from table to table, ensuring every customer feels valued. She's the kind of person who remembers your favorite drink after just one visit, who notices when someone needs a kind word more than a meal. At a corner table sits Mr. Thompson, a man in his mid-50s, dining alone. His posture is stiff, his eyes fixed on his plate, barely acknowledging the world around him. He's not here for small talk or pleasantries. His movements are slow, deliberate, as if carrying an invisible burden. Emily approaches his table with her usual grace, offering a polite, "How's everything tasting, sir?" But Mr. Thompson merely nods without lifting his eyes. It's a quiet dismissal, one Emily has encountered before. She doesn't take it personally, some guests just prefer to be left alone. As the evening goes on, the restaurant becomes even livelier, laughter echoing from a birthday party at the back, the occasional clatter of dishes from the kitchen adding to the symphony of a typical night. Emily continues serving, making sure every guest is taken care of. She stops by Mr. Thompson's table again, refilling his glass of water without a word. If she notices the distant look in his eyes, she doesn't show it. Little does he know, before the night is over, a simple act of kindness one he isn't even aware of yet will shift his perspective in a way he never expected. And trust me, you'll want to stay until the end of this story because what happens next is something you won't forget. Mr. Thompson barely touches his food, pushing the mashed potatoes around with his fork, occasionally taking a small bite. His movements are slow, distracted, as if his mind is elsewhere. The conversations around him blur into background noise, couples chatting, families laughing, the occasional clinking of glasses, but none of it seems to reach him. Emily, in her usual attentive way, keeps an eye on him while tending to her other tables. She's seen customers like him before, the ones who carry the weight of the world on their shoulders, lost in thoughts they don't want to share. Some people come in to celebrate, others to escape, and then there are those, like Mr. Thompson, who just need a moment to sit in silence. As she moves through the restaurant, dropping off meals and refilling drinks, she notices something else about him. He hasn't looked at his phone once, nor has he made any effort to engage with anyone around him. He simply stares at his plate, deep in thought, eating slowly, methodically. When she approaches his table again, she offers him a warm smile. "Is everything okay? Can I get you anything else?" Her voice is light, welcoming, as if trying to ease the invisible burden she senses. Mr. Thompson looks up briefly, his expression unreadable. "No, I'm fine," he says, his tone flat, distant. And just like that, his eyes return to his plate, shutting the world out again. Emily doesn't push. She simply nods, clearing an empty plate from a nearby table before moving on. She knows better than to take it personally. Some people just have bad days. But what she doesn't know, at least not yet, is that this man, sitting alone in the corner, will soon become the center of an unforgettable moment. A moment that will prove how a single act of kindness can ripple through someone's life in ways they never expected. As the evening winds down, the restaurant starts to empty. The laughter and chatter that once filled the space now fade into a softer hum, leaving behind only a few lingering guests finishing their meals. Mr. Thompson remains in his seat, his plate mostly cleared, though it's clear he ate more out of necessity than enjoyment. Emily watches from a distance, waiting for the right moment to bring his check. She approaches with the same warmth she offers every customer, setting the small leather bill holder gently on the table. "Whenever you're ready, sir," she says with a kind smile. Mr. Thompson nods but says nothing. He takes a deep breath before reaching for his wallet, his fingers moving slowly as he pulls out his credit card. There's something hesitant about the way he slides it into the check holder, as if part of him is reluctant to let go of it. Emily picks up the bill and heads to the register, running his card while he remains seated, staring at nothing in particular. When she returns, she places the receipt in front of him, along with a pen. "Thank you for dining with us tonight," she says gently, though she isn't expecting much of a response. He barely acknowledges her, signing the slip quickly before setting the pen down. Without another glance, he stands, grabs his coat, and walks toward the exit. Emily waits a moment before picking up the receipt. Her eyes immediately go to the tip line blank. No extra amount, no small gesture of gratitude. Just the exact total of his meal, nothing more. She exhales quietly, not with frustration, but with acceptance. It's not the first time this has happened, and it won't be the last. Some customers tip well, some don't tip at all. It's just part of the job. Still, she can't help but feel a small sting. Not because she expected a reward, but because she had served him with the same kindness she gave everyone else. What she doesn't realize is that this night isn't over yet, and soon, something will happen that neither she nor Mr. Thompson could have predicted. Emily slips the receipt into her apron pocket and moves on, brushing off the disappointment as just another part of the job. She's been in the service industry long enough to know that not every customer acknowledges her efforts. Some leave generous tips, some leave just a few coins, and some, like Mr. Thompson, leave nothing at all. The restaurant is nearly empty now, the once bustling energy settling into a quiet lull. Emily takes a moment to stretch her sore shoulders before heading toward the back to drop off some dishes. As she passes the register, the manager, a kind-hearted man named Greg, notices her expression. "No tip?" he asks, nodding toward the receipt still peeking out of her apron. Emily offers a small, tired smile. "Not this time," she says with a shrug. "It happens." Greg sighs, shaking his head. "Some people just don't realize how hard you all work." But Emily only laughs softly. Maybe he had a rough day. It's not always personal. Her words are genuine. She's learned not to let moments like these weigh her down. People carry burdens they don't always show, and sometimes, kindness is about giving without expecting anything in return. What she doesn't know is that, earlier that night, she had done something far greater than just serving Mr. Thompson a meal. She had already shown him kindness in a way he wasn't even aware of yet, and soon, he would come to realize it in the most unexpected way. Greg watches as Emily moves back to her duties, her usual bright energy dimmed just slightly. He's seen it happen before, good servers working tirelessly, only to be dismissed without so much as a thank you. It never sits right with him, but he knows Emily well enough to understand that she doesn't dwell on these things. She carries on, giving every customer the same warmth, no matter how they treat her in return. Still, something about this particular interaction lingers in his mind. He remembers seeing Mr. Thompson when he first walked in, his shoulders tense, his expression distant, a man who seemed lost in thought, burdened by something invisible. Greg sighs, running a hand through his hair. "Some people just don't realize what goes into this job," he mutters under his breath. Emily, overhearing, chuckles as she sets down a tray of glasses. "It's okay, Greg. Not everyone tips, and that's fine. Maybe he's going through something." Her words are lighthearted, but Greg knows Emily. She always gives people the benefit of the doubt, sometimes to a fault. He shakes his head. "You're too nice, you know that." She grins. "I try." But what Greg doesn't know, what even Emily herself has almost forgotten, is that she had already gone out of her way for Mr. Thompson tonight, long before the bill ever reached his table. And though he may not have shown any appreciation at the moment, he was about to find out just how much her kindness had already touched his life. Earlier that evening, before the dinner rush had fully taken over the restaurant, Emily had been moving between tables, balancing plates, and refilling drinks with her usual ease. That was when she overheard a quiet, hushed conversation coming from the corner where Mr. Thompson now sat. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. Servers often picked up bits and pieces of conversations throughout the night, but something in his voice made her pause. She glanced over subtly and saw him speaking softly on the phone, his fingers rubbing his temple as he listened. "No, I understand. I just need a little more time," he said, his tone strained. A long pause followed. "Yeah, I know. I just wasn't expecting things to get this tight." Another pause, then a heavy sigh. "All right. Thanks." Emily quickly looked away before he noticed her nearby. She didn't know the full story, but she knew that tone, the weight of financial stress, the exhaustion of trying to make ends meet. She had been there herself once, struggling to pay rent, stretching tips just to get by. So, when Mr. Thompson later placed his order, a simple meal, nothing extravagant, Emily made a quiet decision. As she passed the cashier on her way to the kitchen, she leaned in and whispered, "Take a little off that table's bill. Just a few dollars. I'll cover it." The cashier raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" Emily nodded. "Yeah. Just don't tell him." It wasn't much, just a small, silent gesture, but sometimes kindness didn't have to be grand to mean something. She hadn't thought much of it after that. To her, it was just another way to put good energy into the world. What she didn't realize was that soon, Mr. Thompson was going to find out exactly what she had done. And when he did, it would change everything. As the night carried on, Emily never gave her small act of kindness another thought. To her, it wasn't about recognition or gratitude, it was simply who she was. A few dollars off a meal might not seem like much, but she knew from experience that even the smallest relief could make a difference for someone struggling. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson remained unaware of what had been done for him. He ate his meal in quiet contemplation, lost in his own worries. The weight of his financial troubles pressed heavily on him, making it hard to focus on anything else. His mind kept circling back to that phone call, another reminder of overdue payments, another conversation filled with apologies and uncertainty. When his check arrived, he glanced at the total and barely noticed that something was missing. A few dollars less than what he expected, but he was too preoccupied to think much of it. Maybe he had miscalculated when ordering. Maybe there was a small discount he wasn't aware of. Either way, he simply signed the receipt, left no tip, and walked out without a second thought. For him, the night was over. Just another meal. Just another reminder of the financial strain weighing him down. But as fate would have it, the night wasn't quite over yet, because just as he was about to leave the restaurant, he overheard something that stopped him in his tracks, something that would make him turn around and see everything in a new light. Mr. Thompson had almost reached the door, his coat draped over his arm, when a conversation near the front counter caught his attention. He hadn't been listening at first, his mind still tangled in financial worries, but then he heard a familiar name. Yeah, Emily covered part of his meal. Didn't even tell him. His steps faltered. He turned slightly, just enough to see two employees chatting near the register. A younger waiter, stacking menus, shook his head in disbelief. She's always doing stuff like that. Just a couple of bucks, but still, some people wouldn't even notice. Greg, the manager, chuckled. That's Emily for you. She probably figured he was having a rough day. Mr. Thompson stood frozen. His grip on his coat tightened as the words sank in. Emily paid for part of my meal. He glanced back toward the restaurant, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. She was clearing a table near the back, her expression calm, her movements effortless. She had no idea he was standing there, no idea he had just learned what she had done for him. And suddenly, the realization hit him like a weight in his chest. He had walked out without tipping her, without so much as a thank you. A lump formed in his throat. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the kindness he had overlooked, the generosity he had failed to acknowledge. He had been so wrapped up in his own problems that he hadn't even considered the effort she had put into serving him, let alone the quiet gesture she had made without expecting anything in return. For a long moment, he stood there, conflicted. He could leave now, pretend he never heard anything, or he could do what he knew in his heart was right. Taking a deep breath, Mr. Thompson turned around and walked back inside. Mr. Thompson stepped back into the restaurant, his pulse quickening as he made his way toward the section where Emily was clearing dishes. His earlier indifference had melted away, replaced by something unfamiliar: humility, maybe even a little shame. Emily, still unaware of his return, stacked a few empty plates onto her tray. She had long since moved past the thought of the missing tip, treating it like any other night. But as she turned to head toward the kitchen, she nearly bumped into him. "Oh," she said, startled, before offering the same warm smile she had given him earlier. "Forgot something?" Mr. Thompson hesitated for a moment, then reached into his wallet. His fingers brushed against a few small bills, but something inside him told him that wouldn't be enough. Instead, he pulled out a crisp $20 bill, more than he had originally planned, more than just a symbolic gesture. He extended it toward her with an awkward cough. "This is for you," he said, his voice quieter than before. Emily blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, sir, you don't have to." "No, I do," he interrupted, his throat tight. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't realize what you did for me." He shook his head, forcing himself to meet her eyes. "That was incredibly kind, and I didn't even say thank you." Emily's lips parted slightly, her surprise evident. Then, slowly, a genuine smile spread across her face. She didn't reach for the money right away, as if making sure he truly wanted to give it. "I didn't do it for a thank you," she said softly. I know, he admitted, and that's exactly why it matters. He pressed the bill into her hand, holding it there for a moment before stepping back. I just wanted you to know I see it now, and I appreciate it. Emily finally accepted the money, giving him a nod of gratitude. But more than that, she gave him something far more valuable, a moment of understanding, a moment of grace. As Mr. Thompson turned to leave again, he felt lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted, not the financial one, but the weight of his own perspective. He had walked into this restaurant seeing only his own struggles. Now, he was leaving with a new lesson in kindness. As Mr. Thompson stepped outside into the cool night air, something inside him felt different. It wasn't just about the money he had handed Emily, it was about the realization that had come with it. How often had he gone through life, too wrapped up in his own struggles to notice the kindness of others? How many moments had he overlooked, dismissing them as insignificant when, in reality, they had meant something? Tonight had started like any other. He had come in, eaten his meal, paid his bill, and left nothing remarkable, nothing memorable. But in the span of just a few minutes, everything had shifted. A simple act of generosity, one he hadn't even been aware of, had opened his eyes. He glanced back through the restaurant window, watching as Emily moved gracefully between tables, still tending to her customers with that same quiet warmth. She wasn't expecting recognition. She never had been. Mr. Thompson sighed, tucking his hands into his coat pockets. He had been so focused on what he lacked, on the weight of his own problems, that he had failed to see the good that still existed around him. Maybe tonight was a lesson, a reminder that kindness wasn't always loud or obvious. It was often quiet and noticed, given freely without expectation. And maybe, just maybe, it was time he started paying closer attention to it. With that thought in mind, he turned and walked into the night, carrying with him something far more valuable than the meal he had paid for, an understanding that kindness, no matter how small, had the power to change everything. Back inside the restaurant, Emily tucked the $20 bill into her apron pocket. But it wasn't the money that lingered in her mind, it was the look on Mr. Thompson's face. She had served hundreds of customers over the years, some kind, some indifferent, and some outright rude. But rarely did someone return just to acknowledge what she had done. She wasn't sure what had made him change his mind. Maybe he had overheard Greg's comment. Maybe something had clicked on his way out. Either way, it wasn't about the tip. It was about the fact that he saw her. That was the thing about working in the service industry. So much of what she did went unnoticed. People came in hungry, expecting good food and decent service, and then they left, often without giving a second thought to the person who had brought their meal, refilled their drinks, or smiled even when their feet ached. But tonight had been different. Mr. Thompson had walked in thinking only about himself, his struggles, his problems. He had left with a new understanding, one that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with gratitude. Emily exhaled softly, shaking her head with a small smile. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was why she kept doing this job, even on the hard days. Because kindness had a way of coming full circle, even when you least expected it. As the restaurant emptied out and the final tables were cleared, Emily found herself thinking about how one small act of kindness had created a ripple far beyond what she had intended. She hadn't paid for part of Mr. Thompson's meal to be noticed. She hadn't expected anything in return. And yet, somehow, that tiny gesture had shifted something, not just in him, but in her as well. She wondered how many times people had done the same for her without her realizing it. A stranger holding the door open on a difficult day. A coworker covering her shift when she was sick. A simple compliment from a customer that brightened an otherwise exhausting night. Greg passed by, giving her a knowing look. Not a bad night after all. Ah, Emily chuckled. Not at all. And it really wasn't. The tip was nice, sure, but what mattered more was the reminder that kindness, no matter how small, had a way of coming back around. Maybe not always in the way you expected, and maybe not even in a way you could see, but it was always there, waiting to be passed on. As she untied her apron and grabbed her bag, she made a silent promise to herself to keep paying attention, to keep giving kindness, even when no one was watching, because you never knew whose life it might touch. And somewhere out there, Mr. Thompson was probably walking home with the very same thought. As Mr. Thompson walked home, the weight on his shoulders felt just a little lighter, not because his financial troubles had disappeared, but because his perspective had shifted. He had spent so much time focusing on what was missing in his life that he had failed to see the kindness that still surrounded him. Emily's small gesture had reminded him of something he had forgotten. Kindness wasn't about grand gestures or extravagant generosity. It was about the little things, the quiet, selfless acts that people did without expecting anything in return. For the first time in a long while, he found himself wanting to be part of that cycle. Maybe he couldn't change his situation overnight, but he could choose to see the good around him. He could choose to be grateful. He could choose to pass kindness forward, just as Emily had done for him. As he turned the corner toward his small apartment, he made a silent promise to himself. The next time he had the opportunity to show appreciation, he wouldn't hesitate. The next time he had a chance to help someone, even in the smallest way, he would take it. Because kindness, true kindness, was never about what you had in your wallet. It was about what you had in your heart. And tonight, for the first time in a long while, his heart felt full.